The convoy had stalled 2 clicks short of the ridge. Comms were cutting in and out. One truck was leaking coolant. Everyone blamed the heat. The map. The wrong routing code. Orders kept changing. No one had eyes on the west slope too far. Too dusty. Too quiet. Staff Sergeant Emery Lynn was checking tire pressure. That was her role. Nothing more. But she'd counted the echoes. Watched the dust rise where it shouldn't. She didn't raise her voice. Just stepped into the nearest cab. Turned the wheel east. And said, without looking up, "It's not a breakdown. They're flanking." The tent smelled of nylon, dust, and reheated coffee. Fluorescent light buzzed unevenly overhead, casting a pale wash across the mission board and the long folding table cluttered with open tablets, printouts, and empty mugs. Most of the conversation hovered around a late-night drone sweep north of the Canyon Pass, where the priority gear runs were already stacked for tomorrow. The outpost at El Kharif had been mentioned once, briefly, then waved off with a shrug. One officer called it a holdover site. Another said the situation was stable, just water rationing. They moved on. Staff Sergeant Lena Ortiz stood near the edge of the room, boots still laced from the motor pool, clipboard tucked against her hip. Her name was not called. She didn't interrupt. She waited until the board cleared, then stepped forward and signed out a requisition form for a solo cargo run. No one stopped her. One enlisted tech glanced at the sheet and asked dryly if she was taking the scenic route. She didn't answer. Another looked up from his seat and muttered that they didn't even have a convoy ready. When she said she was going alone, no one argued. They just let her go. Outside, the air held the thick stillness of early evening. That dry lull before desert winds picked up. Lena crossed the gravel yard toward the vehicle line. A row of trucks sat half covered in fine dust, most tagged for repair or low priority. She walked to the third one from the end, a tan supply rig with faded markings, a cracked windscreen, and mismatched mirrors. It had a full water cage already loaded. The tires looked sound. She circled it once, then climbed in and reached under the driver's seat for the cable bundle she'd stored the night before. With the comms relay down for this route, she'd hardwired a backup into the dash using her own spares. Quietly, methodically, she ran a final check on the wiring. She loaded 2 crates by herself, tightening the rear strap twice to keep them from shifting. The rifle wasn't hers. It came from the storage locker, barely inspected, stamped into her name by a clerk who didn't bother to ask where she was heading. She slung it low across her back, adjusted the harness once, and folded the old dirt map she'd marked the night prior. It slid into the upper sleeve pocket, worn thin at the creases. No one saw her step into the truck. No one walked her to the gate. The barrier arm rose with a buzz and a pause, then dropped again once she passed. The engine rattled once, caught, and held. Inside the ops tent, someone laughed about rations going stale in El Kharif. In the lot, Lena checked her mirrors, clicked on the working headlight, and eased forward without rush. Behind her, the compound settled into night. Ahead, the road bent into darkness with no markers left. She drove into it, quietly and alone. The road narrowed within the first 10 minutes, shoulder line fading into loose rock as Lena Ortiz guided the truck past the last radio tower. The gravel changed texture beneath her tires. From compacted base to uneven ruts and sun-dried ridges, she shifted gently into second gear and kept it there. The engine didn't like fast transitions. Neither did she. The left headlight flickered against a rise of dirt, then steadied. The right one hadn't worked when she signed the truck out and still didn't. Dust spilled behind her in a shallow plume, visible only when the stars thinned above a break in the cloud shelf. She drove with both windows down. Not for air, there was none but to listen. The mirrors were angled precisely, not to watch for threats, but to keep track of whether the tailgate was holding under strain. The water drums in the back rattled with every pitch, the straps groaning slightly with each lean into a turn. The dashboard was cracked along the center seam. The temperature dial stuck 3 degrees too high. A line of old tape ran across the top lip, curling at the edge where someone had once tried to label the radio channels. The system itself was long dead. Lena had wired the backup transmitter straight into the panel, resting the fuse block inside the ashtray slot. It blinked once every 30 seconds. Low and steady, the signal was directional. She would be in blackout for at least another hour. The map sat against her left arm, still folded, but now softened by sweat. She didn't unfold it yet. This stretch she knew from dry run briefings: 4 ridges, 1 switchback, 2 erosion cuts. The wind patterns on the western drop came fast and curled into gullies, nudging the wheel left even when it felt like it should be right. She let the truck drift with it, hands light on the wheel, correcting only at the end of the push. Her eyes scanned ahead. Then again. A ridge marker came up where expected. A rusted metal stake, half sunk into gravel, barely visible in the weak beam. She clicked the dash light once, just long enough to match it to the memory of the contour line on the overlay. Elevation held. The engine coughed once at throttle drop, then leveled. She tapped the gauge. It fluttered. Then read true. The truck creaked as she descended into the first hollow. Tires shifted in the dust. A loud metallic thud sounded in the rear panel. One of the drums had rolled half an inch. She pulled to a crawl, pressed the brake gently, then let it glide. No overcorrection, no sudden stops. She reached behind her seat for a loop of tie-down and wedged it tighter through the pass rail. Back in gear. She moved on. The terrain grew darker as the clouds thickened overhead. No light from ahead. No reflection from behind. Just the truck's breath and her own rhythm. She passed a broken milestone, once numbered, now unreadable. Still, she counted it. 3 more to the gulch. She sat forward an inch, easing her foot over the brake to keep the truck from bouncing through the shallow dip too hard. Her hands remained steady. Every movement was measured. A gust came across the bend, tugging at the side of the truck. She leaned into it by feel, not force, letting the frame flex rather than resist. The mirror showed no movement in the load. She listened. The water drums knocked once, twice, then settled. Her shoulders rolled once in the seat, not out of tension, just to keep blood in the joints. She tapped the panel switch to recheck power flow. It held green. She didn't speak. There was no one to speak to. The road ahead dropped slightly, the incline hiding what came next. Lena adjusted hair grip, then leaned her elbow against the door. The truck rumbled onward, slow and obedient. Its flaws familiar now. She trusted it the way she trusted the map, not because either was reliable, but because she knew where they'd fail, and she was ready for when they did. The turn came sharp off a blind corner. The road pinched tight between rock outcrops. Lena Ortiz downshifted instinctively, headlights dragging across a jagged wall of dust just before her tires crunched over scattered gravel. The truck slowed with a guttural grind. Then she saw the wreckage. One tower was gone entirely, its support base twisted in half like bent scaffolding. With sandbags burst open across the center line, a steel barrier leaned at an angle, half buried under a flipped vehicle whose axle still spun slowly in the breeze. Smoke curled low out of the undercarriage, blue and thin. The checkpoint was dead quiet. No lights, no movement. She braked hard and killed the engine. She didn't grab her rifle out of instinct. She grabbed it because her hands were trained to do so. The sling caught across her shoulder as she stepped down. The wind had dropped enough for her boots to crunch against fine stone. Every motion felt louder than it should have. Her eyes swept the perimeter. Sandbag lines were scattered unevenly. The radio pole was cracked halfway up. Comms wire dangling. One end sparking softly against the frame. Still no sound. Then something moved. Low. Behind the overturned rig. A shape dragged itself forward, an arm pulling across broken glass. Fingers clenched to a radio that wasn't transmitting. Lena dropped into a crouch behind the outer stack of crates. Rifle angled low. She waited. Another breath passed. No gunfire. No motion from the hills. Just that one figure crawling. Left leg limp. Face turned toward the dirt. She moved fast and silent, crossing the road in a wide arc. Rifle ready. From the far side, she could see him clearer, now uniform still intact. Blood trailing down the inside of his sleeve. Lips moving but soundless. Beyond him, under a collapsed tarp, a second soldier lay on his back, motionless. She knelt beside the first man. "I need you to stay still," she said calmly. "You're safe." He blinked once, eyes glassy. His skin was pale beneath the dirt. Lena set the rifle aside, unfastened her pack, and pulled the field kit open with steady hands. The wind picked up again, just enough to lift the edge of her sleeve as she unwrapped the tourniquet. The leg wound was clean, but deep shrapnel likely. Lower quad. She looped the strap, locked it tight, and counted under her breath while the blood slowed. His breathing evened slightly. He wasn't speaking, just watching her with the look of someone too tired to ask why she was the only one here. The second soldier was worse. His chest moved shallow, barely noticeable. She stepped around the wreckage, one knee pressing into the dirt, and placed 2 fingers against his throat. Pulse was faint, no visible bleeding, but his head had struck something hard. She braced his neck with both hands, checked for spinal compression, then rolled him onto his side, just enough to clear his airway. Her gloves were slick now, not from blood, just the humidity of the windless hollow, the sweat from both of them, and the fine grit coating everything. She found a patch of shade under the collapsed tower frame and dragged the first soldier into it. His weight was uneven, but he didn't resist. Once he was down, she layered her jacket beneath his shoulder and pressed a hydration patch to his inner arm. It would hold for now. Back at the truck, the cab door still hung open. She ran back without looking up. The road was too exposed, the hill lines too quiet. Inside the rear bed, the water drums sat tight. Straps pulled hard against their frames. She glanced once at the placement. No easy room, not unless she rebalanced. She grabbed a fold of netting from the side rail, tossed it across the deck, and jumped down again. Her breathing stayed low and slow as she lifted the unconscious man over her shoulder, pausing halfway to shift the weight, then again to keep his neck aligned. Her steps didn't slip. She'd done this before. Just not here. Not now. She loaded him carefully into the back, laid him across the open crates, and wedged one pack beneath his legs. The second soldier she helped in with a shoulder under his arm. He groaned softly but didn't speak. She strapped him into place beside the other, checked both pulses again, and pulled the tarp overhead to shield them from the grit. Then she stepped back and looked at what she had left. The water crates were still stacked, 4 high and 3 wide. The drums weren't safe to reposition without losing tension. The weight calculation ran quickly through her head. Cargo or casualties? Space or stability? She said nothing. She just stood still, one hand on the tailgate, the other resting lightly on the edge of her sleeve pocket where the paper map sat folded. Dust swirled around her boots. The flipped vehicle still smoked, forgotten and leaning. The choice wasn't written anywhere. It never was. The headlights cast a pale arc over the gravel. dust curling in slow waves around Lena Ortiz as she stepped back onto the truck bed. The two wounded soldiers lay motionless under the tarp, their positions braced but far from stable. The crate stacks beside them didn't leave enough room. Not for the rough terrain ahead. Not for safety. She didn't hesitate. She climbed back down and walked to the rear strap housing. The webbing was tight from her earlier loading. But she released the corner ratchet and eased the tension by hand. One of the water drums rocked slightly. She caught it with her shoulder and shifted it half a foot toward the front corner. The tie-down rail squealed from the strain. Dust coated her gloves as she dragged the next drum sideways and jammed it tight against the tailgate bulkhead. Her arms burned with the effort. The movement was more weight shift than strength short. Controlled bursts. Boots gripping against the edge lip of the truck floor. The truck creaked again. She steadied herself and adjusted the front stack by pulling the bottom container out 2 inches, angling it against the side panel. That alone bought her 12 inches of clearance, barely enough to offset the second casualty's legs. The rear straps were too short to reposition. She unthreaded one, pulled off her belt, and fed the tongue through the loop bracket. The leather cracked slightly in the cold. It wasn't perfect, but it held enough tension to keep the central barrel braced against the load wall. She twisted the end around twice and jammed it flat beneath the crate lip. She checked it by leaning her weight into it with one knee. The belt held. Back at the forward net anchor, one hook had frayed at the clasp. She dropped to a knee, cut the lace from her left boot with her pocket tool, and ran it through the lower ring, cinching it tight against the side weld. The line trembled when she tugged it. It held just long enough. Her breathing stayed low. Even, measured. Not from calm, just control. She ran a full circle around the bed, testing tension with one hand, adjusting anchor angles with the other. The crickets had returned to the roadside brush. A few called in soft pulses. Metal groaned faintly under weight shifts as the truck settled. The wounded didn't move. The tarp edge fluttered once in the breeze, then dropped. She returned to the cab slowly, one palm brushing the door frame as she passed. Her gloves left faint streaks on the metal. Inside, the seat creaked beneath her. She adjusted the rearview mirror and checked both tie-down points through the narrow sliver of back window. Everything was wedged. Not stable, but secure enough. Her fingers acted. One knuckle had split near the nail. She wiped it against her thigh and reached for the ignition. The night held steady around her. No lights on the ridgeline. No radio. No eyes watching. The engine turned over. Low and slow. She rested her hand on the gear lever for just a second longer than usual. Then she drove. The main route ended in crumbled rock and a broken culvert. The road ahead split open by recent rain or impact. Lena Ortiz killed the engine just long enough to check the angle, then reversed cleanly into the turnout and circled back to a fork she'd passed 20 minutes earlier. The ridge road hadn't been on her map, but the topography made sense. Elevation would hold to the east. She shifted into gear and followed it up. The slope narrowed. Loose stones scraped against the tires. Dust curled in the headlights, thickening into small clouds. With each turn, above, the stars sharpened between gaps in the ridgeline, undisturbed and watching. The engine kept low, a steady hum against the silence. Her window was down again, one elbow resting near the frame. Her breath moved lightly, eyes forward, hands steady. Then she saw the light. A faint orange flicker danced just ahead, low against the base of a switchback. As she climbed the curve, the glow resolved into shape, 2 flares planted in the ground. Burning at opposite ends of a wide turnout, figures stood near them. 5 at least. Maybe more behind the brush. No insignia. No uniforms. Rifles slung but not raised. They didn't step into the road. They didn't speak. They waited. Lena downshifted once and let the truck idle to a crawl. The tires rolled with a whisper. Rubber over dust. Her fingers hovered near the rifle strap at her shoulder but didn't touch it. Instead, she slowed to a full stop, 10 meters out, and shifted into neutral. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. She opened the door without hurry. Boots meeting the gravel in a quiet step. The men didn't move. The flares hissed faintly in the wind, throwing flickering shadows across their faces. One wore a scarf pulled high. Another had a radio clipped to his vest. Antennas snapped. Their stance wasn't hostile, but it wasn't loose either. Just still, assessing, Lena reached into her sleeve pocket, drew the folded paper map, and held it low in one hand. She took one step forward, slow and square. The wind tugged at the edge of the paper. Her other hand stayed visible. "Water run," she said. Just that. The words hung in the air, neither translated nor challenged. One of the men tilted his head slightly. The light caught on the edge of his cheek. Then he pointed not to her, not at the truck, but toward the upper pass. His arm moved once. No signal. No salute. Just direction. She gave a single nod. Not as thanks, but confirmation. And stepped backward, without turning. The door closed quietly. The truck eased forward, headlights cutting between the men as they stepped aside with slow, even pace. No one followed. The road turned again, just beyond the flares, cutting sharply up into shadow. She didn't look back. The mirror caught a final glimpse of the fading glow, then only darkness. Gravel whispered beneath her tires. The engine picked up, quiet and even. The starlight returned above the ridge, sharp and undisturbed. The path ahead remained empty. She kept driving. The incline came long and steady, the kind that didn't look steep until the engine started to struggle. Lena Ortiz felt it first in the vibration of the wheel, then the stuttering pull in the throttle. The fuel gauge, already unreliable, began to flicker. She didn't wait for it to fail completely. She eased the truck onto the gravel shoulder just before the next switchback. The shoulder sloped toward a dry runoff ditch, loose stone tumbling beneath the tires. As she braked gently, the engine coughed twice, then held it idle. She turned it off. The silence arrived with weight. The wind had picked up. It ran along the curve of the ridge in fitful bursts, lifting dust into thin spirals that crossed the headlights and faded into the dark. Lena popped the hood. The latch resisted, sticky with grit. She pried it open with her elbow and propped it with the worn strut bar. Heat rolled out like breath. The smell hit hard-scorched rubber. Faint fuel vapor. Something close to melting insulation. She leaned in carefully. The auxiliary line, threaded from the reserve tank into the main flow valve, was slick with fuel. A crack in the outer line had widened near the coupling. It wasn't gushing, just enough to kill pressure. She checked the clamp. Loose. Her fingers tested it once, then again. No good. It would tear further before the next rise. Back at the truck bed, she climbed up and pulled one of the tie-down straps from the corner rail. It had enough flex left in the webbing to hold tension, but only if she cut it clean. Her utility blade slid once through the weave. The wind caught the loose end and flapped it against her leg. Inside the cab, the water crate she'd secured earlier had a small manual pump handle clamped to its housing. She twisted it loose, removed the top ring, and took the curved metal stem thin, strong, already pressure tested. It would brace the damaged line if she wrapped it properly. She yanked off her left glove, rolled it, and pressed it flat around the stem for padding. Back under the hood, she worked fast, threading the strap through the lower mount bracket, anchoring the handle in place along the bend of the cracked line, then wrapping the webbing twice to compress the seal. Her knuckles scraped the fan shroud. Grease streaked the side of her hand. She adjusted the tension by feel, pulling until the strap held the line flush. The metal hissed softly as it cooled. She waited 3 beats. No new drip. She stepped back and checked the connection once more with the edge of her thumb. Still dry. She reached over and tapped the starter switch. The engine didn't turn. Then it coughed once. Twice, then caught with a sluggish grind and a deep-throated hum. She watched the fuel line. It held. The idle steadied. The truck was breathing again. She let the hood drop without slamming it. It closed with a dull clunk, and the vibration of the engine ran back through the ground. In the half-light, her face was streaked with dirt and a smear of black across her right cheekbone. She wiped her hands on her pants, leaving long smudges down the thighs. One of her sleeves was torn just above the elbow from brushing against the edge of the wheel well. She didn't fix it. The wind curled through the switchback again, pushing low along the ridge like a warning. Dawn was close now. The air had that dry, metallic bite of sun just waiting behind the horizon. Lena stepped back into the cab, boots crunching over scattered stone. She gripped the wheel with both hands and adjusted her mirrors out of habit. Not neat. The gauges flickered once, then held steady. The road ahead bent upward again, climbing toward the next rise. She pressed the clutch, dropped it into gear, and moved forward with no sound but the hum of the truck and the quiet, steady churn of effort beneath it. The sun was just beginning to edge over the ridge when Lena Ortiz rolled into El Carif. The guard shack at the perimeter was unmanned. The gate left half-latched, swinging a little in the morning breeze. The place looked dry, bone dry. Canvas tarps hung slack against the side of the storage hut, and a thin dust crust lined the concrete walkway leading into the yard. She coasted the truck forward, engine idling low, and parked in the shadow of a stripped comms tower. At first, no one noticed. The outpost wasn't built for ceremony. A few Marines were stretching near the perimeter bunker, sleeves half-rolled, one of them brushing sleep from his eyes. Someone was messing with a coffee packet and an old burner. They turned when they heard the door open. Lena stepped down slow. Her boots hit gravel, the sound dry and solid. Her face was streaked with grease. Her left sleeve was torn and dark, with blood along the seam. But the wound had clotted. One hand rested on the edge of the door as she reached back into the cab and pulled the tarp aside. The sight of the first soldier, pale, braced against 2 folded blankets and bandage drew movement. "Corpsman," someone yelled. Within seconds, the quiet shifted. Boots hit the ground harder. The coffee burner tipped over. A young lieutenant came jogging from the far side of the compound. His expression caught somewhere between confusion and alarm. "What the hell? Where's your escort?" he demanded, eyes sweeping over the truck. "The load? The wounds. Where's the rest of your run?" Lena didn't answer. She climbed into the bed, loosened the belt from the central drum, and pulled it aside. 2 medics reached up to catch the first casualty as she guided him down. "Easy," one of them said, adjusting the man's head, checking the placement of the field tourniquet. The second soldier groaned as they shifted him. Lena steadied his weight with one hand and helped slide him to the edge. The bed creaked underfoot. Her glove slipped slightly on a crate corner. She adjusted. They came from checkpoint 12. One of the medics said quietly, already pressing a scanner to the soldier's wrist. "That station's cold. We haven't heard traffic from it in 2 days. They said we weren't on the schedule." The second medic added, voice low, almost automatic. The lieutenant turned again, slower this time. His tone softened, but the question still came. "Who signed your dispatch?" Lena didn't respond. She dropped from the truck bed, boots landing clean, then pulled the rear crate strap and started unfastening the drums. Her movements didn't rush. They followed a rhythm. Unbuckle, shift, lower, adjust the base of the drum with one boot so it wouldn't roll. The plastic was warm from the sun already. Condensation trapped just below the lid. A logistics tech joined the edge of the group, blinking hard and rubbing his eyes. "Is that potable?" he asked, voice rising. "Test it," someone muttered. "Does it matter?" The drums were lowered one by one. Lena stayed quiet throughout, pausing only to retighten a lid that had jostled loose on the last ridge. A lance corporal brought a dolly over, and she motioned toward the crate stack. They started moving the gear toward the shaded platform beside the admin block. There was no ceremony, no announcement. A few more soldiers gathered at the edge of the yard, watching. One of them, standing near the gate, leaned in and said under his breath, "They told us the convoy never launched." Lena didn't answer. She walked over to the side of the truck, pulled the last strap free, and rolled it tight. Her knuckles left faint streaks on the canvas. The lieutenant stepped forward again, his voice lower this time. "We'll debrief after medevac. You want to get checked out?" His eyes dipped to the dark patch along her sleeve. She shook her head once. Then she stepped away. She found a concrete block near the comms relay shack and sat slowly. Her hands rested against her knees, palms open. Dust hung in the morning air, golden at the edges. The compound settled back into motion, voices rising, boots scattering, gear shifting, but none of it moved toward her. Lena closed her eyes halfway. She didn't sleep. She didn't flinch. She just sat there, breathing steady. As the drums rolled one by one into the shade, the heat was rising now, slow and heavy, curling off the concrete in waves. The kind of morning that made everything feel slower, even silence. Lena Ortiz stood near the side spigot behind the motor pool, hands under a thin stream of water, watching the dust run down her fingers and disappear into the cracked ground. The grease took effort to lift. She rubbed her palms together, then wiped them dry on the thigh of her pants, smearing the last of it into the fabric. Behind her, the yard was already active. A generator turned over twice before catching. Voices filtered through the still air equipment checklists. Someone laughing, short and tired. A medic calling for restock tags. She stepped away from the sink and reached into her pocket. The map came out folded. She moved to the shade beneath the metal awning and sat on a wide support rail. Placing the paper across her knee, the creases were worn thin now, sweat-stained and torn slightly at the edge. She ran her hand across it once, smoothing it flat with the same care she'd used the night before. Routes traced in pencil, notes scrawled. In short, tight lines. A ridge marked by memory, not by name. She looked at it for a while, then folded it again, precise. Slow, careful at each corner. It slipped back into her pocket like it had never left. A few feet away, a young comms technician stepped out of the ops tent, holding a tablet and frowning. He scrolled twice with his thumb, paused, then looked toward the motor pool. "That can't be right," he said. "HQ shows the convoy as never launched." Someone near the crate stack glanced up. "Then how'd the water get here?" No one answered. The tech didn't press it. He ducked back inside. Lena didn't speak. She pulled a canteen from the side pouch of her kit and unscrewed the cap. The water inside was warm now, the kind that caught in the back of the throat. She took 2 sips. Slow. Then held it in her lap. Her sleeve was still torn. The blood had dried stiff, faded to brown at the edges. She didn't notice, or didn't care. Her boots were scuffed down to the leather, and one sole had started to peel, but they still held. The crate straps from the truck had been returned and coiled, set beside the rear fender for reissue. She stayed where she was, one hand on her canteen, the other resting flat against her leg. No one called her name. No one debriefed her. She wasn't on any clipboard. Not in any report. The sound of a wrench echoed from the garage. A container lid clattered shut across the yard. Nothing moved toward her. Lena looked ahead. Into the sunlight, just beginning to bleed past the shadow line. Her posture didn't shift. She didn't close her eyes. She just stayed there. Quiet. Watching the edge of the day settle into shape, she didn't wait for thanks. She didn't ask for recognition. Lena Ortiz did what needed doing because no one else would. The mission wasn't on the board. The wounded weren't on the manifest. The route wasn't clear. But she saw what others dismissed, trusted her training, and moved forward without ceremony. That kind of strength doesn't come with applause. It comes from knowing your place in the system, even when the system forgets you. Some stories are quiet. They're built from grit, repetition, and the choice to keep going. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts in the comments. Or follow for more stories like this, ones that don't shout but still matter. Sometimes the loudest impact comes from the one voice that never needed to raise itself.